Coming up next on Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable, the U.S. Supreme Court rules on a number of cases directly impacting Arizona, including the congressional redistricting process. This as the High Court agrees to hear another Arizona redistricting case next session. Those stories and more on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable. I'm Ted Simons. Joining us tonight, Mary Jo Pitzel of the Arizona Republic, Howard Fisher of Capital Media Services, and Luigi Del Puerto of the Arizona Capital Times. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled this week that Arizona's Independent Redistricting Commission has the right to draw new congressional maps. Mary Jo, was this a surprise we keep hearing that everyone and their brother had a map being ready to go.
Oh, well, of course, if there's the possibility of redoing the map, there's a lot of people out there that would like to, put in their 3 cents worth. But I think this was widely viewed as a surprise, mostly because after the Supreme Court hearing in early March, the conventional wisdom, such as it was, said, based on the line of questioning, is that, oh, this is going to be a slam dunk for the legislature.
Yeah, and that was crucial because you had a lot of folks saying, the Elections Clause says the legislature of each state is responsible for the time, place, and manner of elections of federal officials. Well, in 1789, there was no initiative, was no referendum, and a lot of the justices, including some who ended up on the other side, said, how can you conflate Arizona's 1912 constitutional provision for initiatives with 1789? And I think it really was a surprise. I thought it was going to go 5-4, even 6-3 the other way.
And when this case was starting, many people shrugged it off. Many people thought, oh, this is just one of those cases that would either get thrown away or get rejected, or the legislature would lose anyway. But at the moment that the U.S. Supreme Court decided to take up the case, then people started viewing it as a very serious threat to the system that we have in place in Arizona. In fact, you could see you could sense the shift in the tone in Democrats' press releases. And you could see that they're very worried, that they are saying that, yes, this probably will happen. They will draw the maps, and this will not be very good for us.
Yeah. And what's interesting, and I know Paul Bender discussed it on the show, is the idea that the majority said, look, we buy the idea that the legislature is the law-making power. The Arizona Constitution says the lawmaking power of Arizona belongs to the people, and the people delegated that to the Independent Redistricting Commission. And obviously you had a few state lawmakers whose heads exploded with that concept, but it is true. If you look in Arizona, the power belongs to the people.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is known on the court as notorious RBG, wrote in the majority opinion that ultimately the power comes from the people. And so notwithstanding when the Arizona Constitution was written, and this has broader implications beyond just state boundaries. California has a commission that was modeled after Arizona's. We've got a couple of other states that have some form of a commission that might have, lesser impact on the process, but this basically it's a big blow for direct democracy, and I've already talked to one initiative effort, the people behind the open primaries, and they're like, yeah, this is the kind of confirmation they need. They're full steam ahead on drafting their initiative.
And in fact, the director of the Clean Elections Commission, Tom Collins, was very happy to read this opinion, because he said, look, this is as Mary Jo mentioned, this is a blow for direct democracy. It's the clearest affirmation of direct democracy, which is the system that we have in Arizona. And of course, he mentioned that the Clean Elections Commission was also created by through the initiative process.
Senate President Andy Biggs said the ruling broadens the term of legislature.
Yeah. Well, again, going back to Justice Ginsburg, she said, yes, if you think legislature as meaning 60 folks in the House, 30 in the Senate, true. But if you take the broadest definition, look in some dictionaries, and if you look at legislature, they will talk about the lawmaking body. Again, now we have to go back to the Arizona Constitution. What is the lawmaking body? And that is, in Arizona, the people. And the people can amend the Constitution. They did that exactly in 2000, and they said, this is what we want, and that for the purposes of redistricting, the Independent Redistricting Commission is the legislature, We have delegated our authority to the legislature for this particular purpose.
But the minority on the opinion, as well as Senator Biggs, their argument is that, look, the word legislature is used in the elections clause, and there are 17 other references in the Constitution to the legislature. And where President Biggs is coming from is like, well, okay, so if in this instance
Right.
we're saying legislature means all the people, then what about in these instances, the other 16 other cases where the
but again-
legislature is
and-
referenced? Does
but-
that mean all the people? Do we
but
put
so-
everything out to a vote of the people?
Exactly.
But so what? Again, you know, the fact is that in Western states in particular,
Well, so then why do we need a legislature? Why do we
well,
need to elect these guys?
I've questioned that sometimes, but you know, leaving that aside. But in fact, we don't legally need a legislature in
No,
this
but
state.
we are a Republican form of
We
government.
are a
right?
Republican form of government, but ultimately, if you look at the Arizona Constitution, the voters could dissolve the legislature and
But
decide
that's why.
everything
But
needs to
that's
be
why
done.
they make
That's-
the initiative process. They make it as difficult as it is to make sure that it doesn't happen for every single legislative effort that comes down the pike. Correct?
Right, and there's a reason why it's easier to do a referendum on a law and much more difficult to do an initiative or amend the state constitution. But Howie, you're right insofar as the state constitution, the ultimate font of authority is the people. However, the point of the minority opinion is that if you look at the U.S. Constitution, legislature was used several times, and in one context, especially in one context, when we changed when we amended the Constitution to say that the U.S. senators would be elected by the people and not by the legislature, when the minority opinion mentioned that and noted very carefully, we're talking about the legislature stripping
but
its
there's a
power and giving it to the people.
Let me give you two answers. The 17th Amendment got rid of the provision the Constitution said the Senate of the state shall elect U.S. senators. That's different than the legislature. Number two, I don't give a you-know-what about what the federal Constitution says about that for the simple reason all these people who are objecting say, well, we are a sovereign state. The states created the federal government. And if you believe that, then in essence, our Constitution trumps.
It comes around a states' rights issue that kind of comes around the other direction and hits some states' rights folks where they least expect it.
They got bitten the you-know-what.
Okay.
And in fact, Hugh Hallman was saying this is a great thing for the states' rights movement. It may prove to be, in the long run, something that they would look at and say, hey, this was a great opinion.
Well, one interesting observation too is that the opponents of this ruling or of the Redistricting Commission's power to draw congressional lines, and it was only about congressional lines,
right.
Was that well, it was a very literal reading of the Constitution, and Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, cited that in writing the dissent for the minority. Interestingly, a few days earlier, in the Affordable Care Act,
Yes.
Roberts, when he wrote for the majority, took a broader contextual view.
Yes.
So, he wasn't reading it just as the state regarding health exchanges.
And it goes even deeper than that. Let's take a look at the gay marriage ruling. If, in fact, you believe sovereignty and each state gets to decide marriage. Remember the Windsor case, which was decided several years ago, where the federal government said we can't stop states from having gay marriage, said it's up to the states to decide what marriage is. And yet, here we are, looking at a new ruling from late last month saying, well, but the 14th Amendment on equal protection trumps the rights of the state.
Right.
So you can look at this pile of opinions that came out and say, I'm not sure what we've got.
All over the map. Now, this, again, as you mentioned, this is congressional maps here.
Yes.
The Supreme Court has decided to go ahead and hear legislative redistricting as well. We're going to have another Arizona case next session.
Yes, so Arizona remains in the spotlight, and on the final day of the court session, they issued an order that said, yep, we'll take this one on. This is a challenge to the way that the 30 legislative districts were drawn. A group of Republican voters, mostly precinct committee people, said, wait a minute, this packed too many Republicans into too few districts, and it violates the one-man, one-vote principle, and it throws advantage to the Democrats.
And this is really crucial because if you believe the Constitution and even the provisions of the act that created the Independent Redistricting Commission, you're supposed to have equally sized district, which would be about 213,000 according to the last census. We had some as small as 203,000, some as large as 220,000. And the argument was made that what they did is, if let's say you had a district that could go either way, you take a few of the Republicans out of there, put them in a district that's already Republican, you now have an undersized district, but one where the Democrats have a better chance of winning. And so you come into a question of A, is a requirement for equally sized districts, and B, can you use politics? Now, I think the second question's been answered. We've been using politics for redistricting for years. The question of whether the commission can do that is another question.
Now, the IRC, of course, argued that they had to do what they had to do. They had to take away a few Republicans, put them in other districts because they had to comply with the pre-clearance requirement and make sure that on the first try, the Department of Justice would approve the map and didn't have to redo it again.
All right.
Okay,
quickly.
But the fact is the pre-clearance requirement was subsequently repealed by the U.S. Supreme Court.
It's gone.
So the political ramifications of this is the court could take this up, I don't know, very late this year, early next year. We have an election coming in 2016. We have a primary in August. And it's going to put some people on pins and needles in deciding their strategy.
In fact, there is one other case that potentially would have a very significant impact on Arizona. It's Evanville versus Abbott. It's a case out of Texas. And the issue before the Supreme Court is that when you draw your legislative maps, do you base it on the total population or do you base it on the voter population? That's a very significant question because if you base it on total population, which is what we do and the other states do, then you basically include non-citizens, felons, children, all those people that can't vote. Well, there were these two voters in Texas that said, well, by doing it that way, you are devaluing our vote because now we're in a vote with many more voters.
And this is critical. You know why? Let's take not a realistic situation. Let's say you have one legislative district where you have all undocumented people and one person who's legal. That person gets an equal vote in terms of electing a member of the legislature than another district where they're all documented. And so that one person's vote is equal to 500,000 another. And that's what makes it interesting.
Well, and not to mention the fact that we elect officials to represent all of the people, even little kids, even teenagers who can't vote, even felons who have lost their voting rights.
Okay, before we leave this topic, on both congressional maps, which is a done deal, and the state maps, which is a deal in progress, the political fallout, the ramification. Ann Kirkpatrick's running for Senate. Would she have run for Senate otherwise?
I think she probably would have. I think that you do one of these things, and you sense an opportunity out there. I think the real loser, and who probably somebody who we had to drag out of a bar, is David Gowan. David Gowan wanted to run for Congress in Ann Kirkpatrick's vacated seat. And he had this idea that you could take Congressional District 1, which is really northern Arizona going around down to Graham and Greenlee County, and pull it down to Sierra Vista. You could shove Martha McSally over, and life would be good. Well, he's still looking at running. But when you're an hour's drive from your district and there's no legal requirement to live in it, you always get that question of, are you a carpetbagger?
Other fallout from decision?
Right, and obviously with Kirkpatrick saying that, yeah, we're running. This decision hasn't changed our mind. We're pushing ahead. Barbara McGuire, a Pinal County Democrat, announced that she's looking at CD1. I think other names include the usual suspects. Paul Babu, Gary Keeney, Andy Tobin is among the names being floated as well. There were possibilities or speculations that maybe Kyrsten Sinema would run for the U.S. Senate. The question is obviously she's in a safe district, or at least she's in a district that's not going to change.
And it's interesting you say she's in a safe district because a couple of years ago, everyone and their brother was saying that she's going to have to fight tooth and nail every 2 years.
It's a district that ostensibly is a swing district, and you do have to, I think you still do have to work pretty hard, especially if you get a really strong opponent. I mean, don't forget that her opponents haven't been the strongest people that the GOP could field. It might look different now. And another consequence of this congressional ruling is that there was also speculation that she and Ruben Gallego would sort of be pitched into the same turf and would have to battle for a congressional seat. You won't see that.
One final point on this: on the congressional things, it would have given it to the legislature. Assuming the court accepts the argument that the legislative districts are improperly drawn, let's say ruling comes out last week of June next year, it sends it back to the IRC to redo it. That takes months. I don't see any way short of a federal court ruling that you'll end up with new legislative districts for 2016.
If you wind up with new legislative districts in 2016 or whenever, is it going to change the nature of the state legislature that much?
No, I mean, look, there was an argument to be made that when they did the quote-unquote packing, that it helped. We, right prior to redistricting, we had 21 out of 30 Republicans in the Senate and 40 out of 60 in the House. We're now down 36-24 and 17-13. But it's been, we've had situations where the Democrats actually, were in control back in the 90s in the Senate. So there's a lot of other factors at work other than pure party.
All right, we've got a court that's, the Supreme Court declined this Arizona voter registration suit. Talk to us about what this suit, this is Arizona and Kansas. This means, we got dual voting for the foreseeable future?
I believe we do. What happened is that there was a court, the Supreme Court said you cannot require, about 2 years ago, said you cannot require documents proving citizenship if you're going to register using the federal voter registration form. Arizona already requires that because the power of the people, an initiative made that a requirement in this state. So once the Supreme Court made that clear, Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State in Kansas, took the lead on this, but joined by Arizona, and went and said, well, you know what, we think that the Federal Elections Assistance Commission, we want to rewrite the rules so that they should require documentary proof of citizenship. And this thing rattled through the courts, and ultimately what the Supreme Court, it was upheld, it was turned down by the Ninth,
I think it was the 10th.
by the 10th Circuit.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court said, we're not going to take it.
Which means we are left with this two-track system of voting, which Arizona saw last year. So if you have registered using the federal form, you get a federal-only ballot. For 2016, that will mean you can vote for president, and you can vote for your congressman, and you can vote in the U.S. Senate race. That's it. If you have registered using the Arizona form, which is the vast majority of people, then you get the full ballot all the way from president down to school district. And an operative phrase here is vast majority. Not many folks are doing that federal form.
Right. There are a couple hundred that did it the last time. So it's not a whole lot of people. Now, of course, the argument against a dual track system is that if it's a close race, then those few number of people could make a difference.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. A lot of folks do voter registration drives. Now, your driver's license can serve as proof of citizenship for the form, but if you don't have a driver's license, I'm not carrying around my birth certificate, I'm not carrying around naturalization papers.
Or your passport.
Or my passport. And so you've got a question of the folks in the voter registration drive will be using that federal form a lot more now that it's very clear, because they figure if we're out in the street, out in front of the Burton Barr Library doing this, we'll at least get them registered for federal races. And it's going to be a lot more folks, I think, for the 2016 election using that federal form.
Perhaps more, but the other factor in this is the cost, and this is borne by the counties because they, put on the elections. And last year in 2014, it was about a $250,000 cost to Maricopa County alone because you have to print up 2 sets of ballots.
And not only cost, but just the operations as well. I mean, it's hardly a streamlining effort.
However,
and that's exactly what the county election officers were complaining last time. If we have a dual track system, then you're navigating through tracks. And how do you deal with that?
All of this stems from an opinion that former Attorney General Tom Horne wrote, that then Secretary of State Ken Bennett adopted. Current Secretary of State Michelle Reagan says, yeah, well, we got to stick with that. Now, interestingly, other states haven't done that. I think Kansas did. So we've got Arizona and Kansas.
This all comes back to the fact that Congress specifically authorized the Elections Assistance Commission to come up with a single federal voter registration form. And the commission is fully empowered to go ahead and decide what is appropriate. And the commission said, we don't need proof because it's a felony if you swear to it and you don't do it. There's a lot of other ways they said that you can check, you compare it to jury pools and everything else, and we don't think you need it.
All right, the Supreme Court also upheld a lethal injection procedure that involves a drug that I'm not going to try to pronounce, but this is a drug that Arizona uses. This is an Oklahoma case here, and so first of all, brief synopsis of the case and what it means to Arizona.
This case dealt with one question: is the use of this particular drug unusual and cruel punishment? And the Supreme Court decided that it is not, and it's not, especially because those folks have already been convicted. They've gone through the court system, they have appealed their cases, and they have lost their cases. And the Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court really did was also affirm the constitutionality of the death penalty. And because it is constitutional, they said, we cannot see why this would be a cruel and unusual punishment. One other thing, they said, you have to show a substitute. If we're not going to use this particular drug, then show us a way.
And that's the key here. This first drug is essentially a very strong sedative. The idea of sedating somebody is you've got two other drugs that most other states use. One that stops your heart and one that basically stops your breathing. It paralyzes you. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg and some of the other folks, and Sonia Sotomayor, said, wait a second, it's like being burned alive if you can feel it. Now, obviously, we don't know what people can feel, but there have been a couple of botched executions, one in Arizona and one in Oklahoma, where people kept moving for hours, and the question was, if this drug doesn't properly sedate you, is that cruel and unusual?
So, A, do executions continue in Arizona?
Yes, but. And the but is that there is an Arizona Supreme Court order holding up executions while another case is decided. But I think eventually we're going to restart them.
Right, because the state of Arizona agreed. This is a separate case, but in a separate case, the state of Arizona agreed to hold the executions because that case dealt with that case trying to find out exactly how we concluded that we're going to use this particular drug in the state. We're trying to get information about what the plaintiffs are. So while that case has not been resolved yet, well, the state agreed that we're not going to do executions. But of course, with the guidance from the U.S. Supreme Court now, the chances are that particular case would soon be resolved using using the guidance of this in this other case.
And so the answer to question B is, do they resume using this drug?
Well, I think if you can't, this comes back to the root problem. We used other drugs till the manufacturers said, you know, it's bad PR to have us known that our sedatives are being used to kill people.
Yeah.
And so to a certain extent, the foes of the death penalty, by getting these other companies to stop providing the drugs, almost have forced this one. Do they use this drug? Probably, because there's nothing else available.
All right, let's get away from the court decisions for a second here and get to an audit of the Department of Child Safety. It's basically the nose-to-toes thing that Senate President Andy Biggs wants. He got it, and neither nose nor toes came out very well, huh?
No, it was done by the Chapin Hall Center for Children at the University of Chicago, well respected in child welfare issues, and they took a look at how the agency had been operating. And this was during a period where you had one set of leadership, and then Governor Ducey came in and made a change, and I couldn't divine from the audit, if it reflected a lot of those changes, but it did show that just problems with the agency, that they don't have a clear way to sort out the calls that come into their child abuse hotline and to classify them. Which ones do we really bear down on and deal with first? Even though they have a priority system, the audit found that it was inadequate.
Yeah, and the audit really affirmed what we've been hearing from many sectors, especially child advocates and family advocates, and they've been saying that the reason why we're seeing all these cases because we have been pulling back on funding, in-home services, and child care subsidies, all those other programs that we had before that sort of acted as a safety net. When they went away, now we're seeing all these cases, and the audit report essentially affirmed that view.
And so what, we're going to see a slew of legislation next time around for additional family services?
Sure. And, that and the Easter Bunny is going to come to the legislature.
You're going to see, I think, an effort to narrow the definition of what constitutes neglect of a child, because Arizona statute is somewhat broad, and that can be, and there's not consistent standards for how you interpret that. So I know that there's a move underway to really narrow that definition. Some people are going to have a big problem with that.
Which brings us back, how many times around this table have we talked about this pendulum here? You err on the side of taking the child out at the first sign of something. They show up at school hungry, they show up at school a little bruised. You take them out to make sure you don't wind up in Lori Roberts' column. Yeah. The other side is you do what you can. There's a large group in the legislature that believes in all circumstances, you keep the family together, no matter what. But again, now you're down to, do you provide the services?
Yeah. A lot of the turmoil that the agency is going through most recently, a lot of people point to the current director, Greg McKay. I mean, McKay looked at this audit and said, good ideas, guys. We're working on some of this and other stuff we will get at. But it's unclear, where these problems stem in terms of leadership. They didn't name names or point fingers. They just talked about broader systemic issues.
Well, that's your job, is to name names and point fingers. Good to have you all here. Thanks for being here. Happy 4th, Howie.
Yes, well, I've got my sparklers ready to go, but why won't you let me light these in the studio?
We'll talk about it afterwards.
Okay.
Because I want to be a bigger part of it.
Okay.
Monday on Arizona Horizon, we'll talk about how employers might be impacted by the Supreme Court's same-sex marriage ruling, and we'll see how one Valley artisan makes custom hats by hand. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thanks for joining us. You have a great weekend.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.